system breakdown. A new investigation into the White House is launched. We'll talk to House Majority Whip Steve Scalise. Rebuilding Iraq. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson has a plan to help the Middle East recover from devastation left by ISIS. Papal tradition. We're in Rome for Pope Francis's Ash Wednesday Mass and talking about his message to the faithful. And living Lent well. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill tell us what they're doing to grow spiritually. On EWTN News Nightly for this Ash Wednesday, February 14th, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective on this Ash Wednesday and Valentine's Day. I'm Lauren Ashburn. A horrific scene at a Florida high school this afternoon. Developing now, the shooting in Parkland in southeast Florida sends students rushing out into the streets as SWAT team members lock down the building. As of late this afternoon, the Broward County Sheriff's Office tweeted that the shooter, a student, was still at large. It's not clear how many students are hurt. On Twitter, President Trump sent his prayers and condolences to the families of the victims. Congress is launching an investigation into President Trump's former staff secretary, Rob Porter, and his interim security clearance. It comes as the White House fields more questions about Porter, who allegedly has a history of spousal abuse before obtaining a key role in the West Wing. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. South Carolina Republican Trey Gowdy, chairman of the House Oversight Committee, is opening this investigation with a question: how can anyone keep a job at the White House if there are credible allegations of domestic abuse against them? Today, President Trump condemned domestic violence.
I am totally opposed to domestic violence of any kind. Everyone knows that, and it almost wouldn't even have to be said.
The president's comments come after days of focusing on Porter's claim of innocence. A continuous question for the White House press secretary has been who knew about the allegations and when. Sarah Sanders says what was considered to be the FBI's final background report on Rob Porter was received in November by a White House personnel office, but the information was still being processed in that office at the time of Porter's resignation last week. In a congressional hearing yesterday, FBI Director Christopher Wray said the FBI gave the Trump administration information about the investigation into Porter's background multiple times last year, and the investigation was closed in January. The former White House staff secretary, Rob Porter, has denied the allegations against him. Lauren.
Mark, this whole ordeal has caused the top Republican in the House, Speaker Paul Ryan, to call for change. Tell us what he wants to happen.
Today, Ryan said if a person who commits domestic violence gets in the government, then there's a breakdown in the system, and such a breakdown needs to be addressed. Lauren.
Mark Irons reporting from the White House. Thank you, Mark. Joining us now is House Majority Whip Steve Scalise. Welcome to the program.
Good to be with you, and happy Valentine's Day.
And to you. Recently, I heard you speak at the National Prayer Breakfast, and it was so moving that I wanted our audience to hear from you directly about your faith, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But first, does this new investigation by Congressman Gowdy show that Republicans are not buying the shifting White House explanations about Rob Porter?
Well, I think that Chairman Gowdy just wants to get more information. Ultimately, he was let go and released from the White House, which is the right thing to do, because you can't have any kind of tolerance, zero tolerance, for somebody that that commits domestic violence. There's just no excuse for it.
What about the handling of classified material long after the FBI warned the White House about the abuse allegations from the two ex-wives?
Well, I would imagine that's one of the things that Chairman Gowdy wants to look into. I'm not sure the depth of his investigation. I haven't spoken to him about it yet, but obviously he feels like this warrants an oversight investigation.
Did the House leadership authorize Congressman Gowdy to investigate, or is he going rogue here?
No, he actually talked to Speaker Ryan before he did this, so he and the Speaker had a conversation before he initiated the investigation.
All right. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about that. And now turning to your faith and during your ordeal, it was just a horrible ordeal, the shooting on that baseball field in Virginia. You talked about your relationship with God, as I mentioned, at the National Prayer Breakfast. I want to play a clip of you talking about being rushed to the hospital.
They were driving me in an ambulance at 7:30 in the morning in Virginia, fighting Virginia traffic, and needless to say, they weren't moving very fast. And one of the EMTs saw a helicopter coming, and he just took a gamble and said, you know what, that helicopter I think's coming for Steve. Told the driver to turn, and the ambulance turns off and goes back to the baseball field, and sure enough, that helicopter landed on the baseball field. They transferred me, and 4 minutes later, I'm in the emergency room at MedStar Hospital, where they ultimately saved my life. I would have not made it if not for that helicopter.
Congressman, you said there were miracles all around. What else other than that helicopter ride?
Well, I prayed directly to God for some very specific things. And, the fact, number one, that my security detail was there and was able to quickly engage the shooter, it took him away from shooting at us on the ball field where we were just sitting ducks. And ultimately, they took him down. But one of the miracles that I cited, one of my colleagues, Trent Kelly from Mississippi, was playing third base, and the shooter was maybe 30 feet away from him. The first shot fired was at Trent Kelly, and he literally had a direct shot at Trent. Trent looked right at him, and there was a chain link fence, and the bullet hit one of the links in a chain link fence, and I've seen a picture of it, and it diverted the bullet enough away so that it missed Trent completely. The fact that Brad Wenstrup was there, a colleague of mine from Ohio who happens to be a surgeon and was a combat surgeon in Iraq, he quickly rushed to me and put a tourniquet on that my doctor said if that tourniquet wasn't applied the way it was, I would have bled out. I would not have made it to the emergency room. So there were a lot of little miracles like that where God was present and intervened to make sure that I was able to make it.
I wonder if that had happened to me and I was lying on a baseball field, I would have started praying, I'm sure. And I just wonder, how important was your faith in getting through the entire ordeal, from the shooting itself to the, 15 weeks you had to spend in the hospital?
15 weeks in one day, to be exact.
Right.
But it was critically important. I've always had a strong faith, but it's not tested like it was here. And so I would directly pray to God and ask him for specific things, but so many other people were praying for me. And really that's one of the things that lifted me up and gave me and my family strength during the really tough times, just to know that people, not only your friends and family back home, but people you've never met before all around the country were lifting you up in prayer. It was powerful. President Trump came with Melania and gave real comfort to my wife in those first few hours. Vice President Pence came a few times, and I've known Mike from when I was serving with him in the House. And just to have him now as Vice President coming and spending real quality time with me there in the hospital was so valuable and meant so much. And then to have my colleagues, Republican and Democrat, come to see me. And then when I returned to the House chamber in September, to get that kind of response.
It was
so moving. It was just
moving.
such a warm feeling to see all those faces, everybody smiling, and it really brought people together.
Has your faith become even stronger since you've recovered?
It sure has, and and I already had a strong faith, but it was tested, and I got to see the wonderful things about God and people. There's so many wonderful people. I don't look in the past. I'm a person who's always focused on the future, and just to see so many people coming out, and you see the goodness in this country and how people responded.
Thank you so much, Congressman Steve Scalise, House Majority Whip, for talking to News Nightly's audience about your faith.
Well, great to be with you, and thank everybody for the prayers and the strong faith that they exhibited to reach out to, in many cases, a stranger that they might not have known. It meant so much to me and my family, and it continues to help lift me up.
Moderate senators from both parties could be near a compromise on a bill to offer young dreamer immigrants a route to citizenship. Roughly 24 senators have been seeking middle ground for weeks. It was unclear how their package will be received by Republican and Democratic leaders. The bill would provide $25 billion over a decade for President Trump's border wall with Mexico. Today, members of the Trump administration defend the president's budget on Capitol Hill, including pro-life provisions. While Congress has already approved a 2-year budget deal, this plan simply lays out the administration's priorities and agenda. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi reports. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. The president's proposal would stop Medicaid and Title X family planning funds from going to abortion providers that receive more than $23 million in federal funds. For example, it would defund Planned Parenthood. Today, some Democrats took aim at the president for that effort.
This is yet another example of this administration siding with religious extremists over the health of women and families in this country. President Trump's budget is no exception. After repeated attempts to defund Planned Parenthood failed in Congress last year, the Trump administration has taken it upon itself to attempt to do so administratively.
President Trump's budget does pump $286 million into the Title X program, which dates back to President Nixon. It provides about 4 million poor women with cheap or free birth control. The plan also includes the Hyde Amendment, banning taxpayer funds from going to elective abortions. And it also won't allow funds to go to states that discriminate against healthcare workers who object to assisting with an abortion. Now, the U.S. bishops praised the budget for banning federal funds for some abortion providers and also for increasing aid to fight the opioid crisis. But the Bishops' Conference blasts cuts to programs that help the poor and the environment. And Lauren, the proposed budget is just the president's wish list and is not likely to become law.
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. Thank you, Jason. Planned Parenthood says it's going on the offensive to push abortion rights in all 50 states. The group says its 10-month plan begins this week in a dozen states and the District of Columbia. One executive says the Trump administration, quote, has been attacking our patients' fundamental rights and access to health care. The push comes as pro-life organizations call on lawmakers to strip Planned Parenthood of federal funding. A Catholic high school in Connecticut says a sophomore with an I support Planned Parenthood sticker on her computer can remain enrolled. Earlier, it said the student would not be allowed back next year if she kept the sticker. That decision drew fierce backlash from alumni. Help is on the way for Iraqis rebuilding their country after a devastating war with ISIS. Dozens of countries have pledged $30 billion in aid and investment, and that includes the United States. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reports from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. That money from the U.S. will also help Christian communities hit hard by ISIS. Tens of thousands of Iraqis have been killed or injured in the war, and thousands more have fled. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson says Iraq can get back on its feet with help from the world.
The government of Iraq is taking steps to match actions with words to demonstrate that Iraq is open for business.
Secretary Rex Tillerson is pledging a $3 billion credit line to help Iraq rebuild. Tillerson making the promise during a meeting in Kuwait with dozens of countries. Top Iraqi officials say it will take more than $80 billion to recover after the reign of ISIS. So far, a number of countries have committed to giving $30 billion. The UN Secretary General says it's a good start.
Is an enormous success. The success the generosity of Kuwait asked for, and the success that the government and the people of Iraq fully deserve.
Much of the focus is on Iraq's second largest city, Mosul, but smaller towns and villages, including many Christian communities, have been devastated. This weekend, the Iraqi Christian Human Rights Council posted pictures of the U.S. ambassador to Iraq. He was visiting the Chaldean Catholic town of Karmalash in the Nineveh Plain. That's an area many churches were damaged or destroyed. Advocates say reconstruction will save the Christian community in Iraq.
The Trump administration has promised to allot millions in direct humanitarian aid through USAID to help religious minorities like Christians. That's reflected in the president's proposed 2019 budget. Now, we asked the State Department for the exact amount of aid that will go directly to Christians. They have yet to respond to our request. Lauren.
We've been asking for that for a while. All right, correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reporting from the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. An Australian judge denies a request from Cardinal George Pell's lawyers to release the medical records of his main accuser. Pell is the highest-ranking Catholic priest to face sexual abuse charges. He strongly denies the allegations. His lawyers tell the court that the claims lack credibility because no one came forward until after news reports of other abuse claims began in 2015. Cardinal Pell, who is on leave as the Holy Father's finance minister, is expected back in court on March 5th. Pope Francis marks Ash Wednesday in Rome with a procession and Mass at the Basilica of Santa Sabina. Before Mass, dressed in purple vestments, the Holy Father walked in a solemn procession between two churches on Rome's Aventine Hill. Earlier today, we spoke to EWTN Rome Bureau Chief Alan Holdren before Francis took part in this centuries-old papal tradition. Alan, why does the Pope start Lent at Santa Sabina every year?
Well, this is a long-standing tradition, Lauren. Popes have long come here to Santa Sabina to celebrate Mass here at the altar that celebrates one of the first martyrs here in Rome, Saint Sabina. And he does so with the Dominicans who have their mother church here. And he does it with faithful from Rome who live in this local community, making a procession from the Church of St. Anselm, which is a Benedictine headquarters, just down the street, comes here to celebrate Mass, has his ashes sprinkled on his head in the local Italian tradition.
What then is a station church?
Well, Station Church is one of these local communities in Rome that date back to the first centuries of Christianity here. And when the Pope, the Bishop of Rome, would go out to meet with them during the late Lenten season. So he would go and basically work for unity in that developing church as it grew. And he would celebrate Mass with those local communities all across the city in what they called stations. They called the churches the stations. And this here, St. Sabina, is the very first of the station churches on a pilgrimage that goes all throughout Lent.
Lent is a time for sacrifice, for fasting. What is Pope Francis asking us to do?
Lauren, he's asking for exactly those things. He said that those things, prayer, fasting, almsgiving, can lead to a renewal of our hearts, which can go cold. He said that they can stoke the flame of charity in our hearts, and that we need that. We need to look towards Easter and towards Christ's resurrection to keep our gaze set on Christ coming into our lives, and to keep our hearts renewed with the charity that comes from Christ.
Alan Holdren, EWTN Rome Bureau Chief from outside Santa Sabina. As we start our faith journey to Easter, a reminder of the rules on fasting and abstinence during Lent. Catholics must fast and must abstain from meat today, Ash Wednesday, and on Good Friday. The fasting rules apply for those between 18 and 59. When fasting, you can eat one full meal and two smaller meals that together don't equal a full meal. All Fridays during Lent are obligatory days of abstinence. Coming up, America in Afghanistan. We'll talk U.S. military efforts to stabilize the nation with a congressman who recently visited the country. And a good prognosis. The Surgeon General has inspiring words for Black History Month. The Lutheran Church opens a Center for Religious Liberty in Washington, D.C. Its mission to fight what their new executive director calls a growing threat to people of faith.
Religious liberty is key because it covers so many things. You know, what people don't understand in the church is that we think we're living in a time where people are saying live and let live. In reality, what they're saying is if you don't live the way I want you to live, you can't live the way you want to live.
National Right to Life held a reception welcoming Greg Seltz to Washington. Seltz says America has undergone a cultural shift that is putting people of faith on the defensive all across the nation. Afghan officials are carrying out talks with the Taliban despite a month of bombings by the militant group. One attack last month in Kabul killed 95 people. Backdoor channels show Afghanistan is open to reconciliation, even though its top ally, the United States, has said it does not want to negotiate. The war in Afghanistan is entering its 17th year. Joining us now is Congressman Mike Gallagher, a Republican from Wisconsin who serves on the House Armed Services and Homeland Security committees. Obviously, is a devout Catholic. You received your ashes this morning at the Capitol. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Lauren. I really appreciate it.
You just came back from Afghanistan at the end of last year, and the big question is, why do these attacks keep happening? And why can't Afghanistan or our troops, coalition troops, stop them?
Well, I think it's important to remember that in recent years, we signaled that we were going to be drawing down our efforts in Afghanistan. Now, I'm glad to see that the new administration has come in, done a comprehensive review of that strategy, and written its own new South Asia strategy, where it signaled an enduring commitment to our partners in Afghanistan. And certainly we saw that when we visited the troops over Christmas. We saw their belief in the mission, and we saw the belief the Afghan partners have and the gratitude for that commitment. We were told that President Ghani and Chief Executive Abdullah, two men who are political rivals, when they heard that we would not be abandoning the country completely, actually embraced each other and began to cry. And I think that's a reminder of the fact that while these decisions are incredibly difficult for our own country, they're often existential for our allies.
President Trump, though, said that innocent people are being killed left and right and suggested that peace talks with the Taliban are no longer on the table. Back-channel negotiations, however, are happening. Is the Trump strategy correct?
Well, I think they've got the broad outlines correct. I think loosening the rules of engagement, allowing our military greater freedom of action, has actually allowed them to halt some of the Taliban's advances. The other key pillar of the strategy that I think they got right was taking a tougher approach with Pakistan. Pakistan has really been responsible for a lot of the instability in Afghanistan. But to your point, there are serious questions that remain about the strategy. We have to find a way to foster economic development in Afghanistan if we're able to get the security piece right. And at the end of the day, all of our military success on the ground is merely a way of giving the country's political leaders the opportunity to reconcile, to reform, and to demonstrate to their own people that they're a better bet over the long term than the Taliban.
Congressman Mike Gallagher, Republican from Wisconsin, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
The White House honors African Americans during Black History Month, and Surgeon General Jerome Adams applauds one of the president's cabinet members.
The first time I ever interacted with a black physician was in college, when I had the opportunity to meet Dr. Ben Carson. To see a black man making such important contributions to the field of medicine, Dr. Carson, it lit a fire in me.
The White House held last night's event for African Americans in the military. Up next, golden moment. We talk about the Vatican's presence at the Olympics. And Lenten promises.
I'll probably be giving up surgeries for Lent.
Lawmakers tell us what they are giving up for Lent. An update to a story we brought you earlier in the show. Authorities say that the shooter at a South Florida high school is now in custody, and we will have more on that tragedy in tomorrow's broadcast. Pope Francis says the faithful have a right to receive the Word of God at Mass.
Credo, Signore, aiuta la mia poca fede.
Pilgrims and tourists braved cold temperatures and rain today to see the Holy Father in St. Peter's Square. He said going to Mass includes the expectation the Word of God will be read well and explained well in a homily. The Pope also says having a joyful soul means every day is a good day. That's hard to remember, isn't it? The International Olympic Committee formally invited a delegation from the Holy See to the Olympic Games for the first time. We caught up to the Vatican official leading the group.
I have to say that many Catholic IOC members were happy to have a priest, not just the Vatican representative, but the priest among them.
Monsignor Melchor Sanchez brought presents to IOC President, a commemorative set of coins, and a Vatican running jersey. A quick update on the medal count. Germany in the lead with 12. Netherlands, Norway, Canada are next, followed by the U.S. with 7 medals. We won a gold last night in snowboarding. Many D.C. lawmakers took time today to receive ashes. Congressman Steve Scalise and Mike Gallagher shared their thoughts with us as Lent begins.
I'll probably be giving up surgeries for Lent. I hope I don't have to have any more between now and Easter.
It's a critical season. Just a time to reflect, to repent, to delay ourselves gratification, I think brings us closer to God. And I look forward to it every year. As difficult as some of the things you give up can be, I cherish the time.
As Father Patrick said in our Mass today, just down the hall from the studio, Lent is about conversion and turning toward God. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. We'll be back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless you.